There we are. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Lived Experience Impact of Accessibility, hosted by the Maryland Department of Disabilities Statewide IT Accessibility Initiative. Uh, for those of you who are new to us, my name is Stephen Palachuk. I'm the director of the initiative. And joining us today will be Ron Miller and Charles Heiser from NFB. And our goal today is kind of give everyone another perspective on the work we do, because I feel like this is really poignant with the ADA Title II rulemaking just getting delayed. And I know everyone's always worried about the legal compliance factor and is thinking, whoo, we've got another year. And there's more to it than that, because really, while the legal compliance is great to actually make us think about this, ultimately what we're doing has more of an effect than we think and realize. So wanted to give everyone kind of a chance to get that perspective, and then also hear about how the impact of what we do is improving things, hopefully. So before we get into all the details, the usual housekeeping items, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted to our YouTube channel within a couple days, or it started next week. Uh, we also have closed captioning available. You can turn that on from your menu ribbon. It will be the show or hide captions button. If you have a smaller window, it might be under the more menu button that will be at the end of the ribbon. Uh, We don't have any slide decks or anything today, because today's kind of a bit more interactive than our usual webinars. So hopefully it'll be more engaging. We do have Q&A and chat. I will be moderating questions and comments. So when we get to the discussion part with Ron and Charles, feel free to post those, and I will post them to them as they come in. Ron, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself for now, please?
Sure. My name is Ron Miller, and I am with the National Federation of the Blind. I'm actually part of the Center for Excellence in Nonvisual Accessibility, and I am the Accessibility Excellence Advocate for home and independent living. So I'm involved literally in home and independent living. That you might say, oh, it speaks for itself, and I guess it does. But independent living is a very broad brush. So anything that somebody would use to do life, whether it's important things, taking care of themselves and others, or uh, you know, uh, the I'm dealing with something right now that involves being able to have a pizza delivered. But you would think that may not be important, but if you are blind and you like pizza, it's part of independent living. So that's what I do, and that's what I'm involved in.
Thank you, Ron. Charles?
Everything Ron said, except I'm involved in education and employment. So I cover everything from preschool to retirement, which is also a huge brush. So I work a lot with our education program coordinator and our employment programs coordinator, which are two different people who they get to divide education and employment, but I don't. So blind children, blind teachers, teachers who teach blind children, parents, employers, employees, all of it falls under my sphere. And the part that Ron didn't say, but which I would really like to emphasize, is we work as a team. So yes, we do have our spheres of influence, but there are many things that cross over in between home and independent living and education and employment, and many things that fall outside of both of those spheres. So, Ron and I really try and tackle a lot of what we get here at the National Federation of the Blind as a team. Certainly, we have our individual projects that we plug away at from day to day, but it really is a team effort here. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That is very true. Thanks for adding that, Charles.
Thank you very much. So, before we get into the questions and answers part, I do want to kind of give a little bit of background to everyone before we get too deep into it. So, one of the things I always hear about in my position, since I'm working, on the government level, is of course compliance, because we're worried about the ADA, we're worried about Maryland's own non-visual access clause, and following all of these regulations that we're required to. And it's great that those are in place because that gives us a baseline. That gives us something to point to and to say, you need to do this. But one of today's goals is really to point out the difference between compliance and accessibility. Because while compliance kind of gives us a baseline and it gives us at least something to point to and say we're doing the work and getting the work done, just being compliant doesn't always mean you're accessible, because one of the easiest examples to point to is people who are new to using a screen reader or have just learned that it exists think, oh, it can read the website, that's good, we're accessible. There's a big difference between I can read your website and I can move around it just as efficiently and I can make use of it, because just because I can read it doesn't mean, if I click that menu and it takes me 12 inputs that someone can do with a mouse click,
Mhm.
that's not a good user experience. Voting machines is probably something to really point to of uh, you look at how you move through that, and it's supposed to be pretty simple and easy. But if it's, electronic kiosk and it's having some issues or something, it's not, you can use a screen reader with it, but you had to do, again, 12 inputs just to select the candidate for the presidency. Is that a good experience? Does that going to make someone want to use your services? Or, you know, we always hear in government, especially about like, lack of trust or, annoyance with, government services and having to do things. Well, this is where it stems from. So we want to think about today, what are we doing? How is it making things better? And how can we continue to improve it as we move along? One of my main things in my role has been, not just talking about user efficiency too, but trying to demonstrate it to people. Now, full disclosure, I myself do not have a disability. I've been through some blindness and low vision skills training. I have colleagues that I've learned from here, including Ron and Charles and the other members of the NFB. But ultimately, all I'm really doing is kind of simulating the experience. I don't have the life experience that tells you, you know, that everything that you encounter. So there's still things I will miss. And that's why you always hear in the accessibility sphere, learn from them, go to them, have a person with a disability test it, because who better to tell you they're having an issue than the person who's going to have that knowledge and solutions for how, what do they might be able to work around something, but is that something they should have to do? Like, that's sometimes a problem we encounter of like, well, they'll figure it out. Well, you shouldn't be just relying on them to figure it out. Again, what can we improve and make better in the future? And then it's also, again, we can simulate it as much as we, are able to go through training and such, but ultimately there's a difference between the actual experience and the simulation. And that's kind of what we're here to highlight today. Ron, Charles, anything you guys want to add to this?
I think you nail it really well. And what immediately comes to mind is a saying that a former colleague used to say, and he used to say that accessibility isn't necessarily efficiency. Accessibility isn't necessarily productivity. And I think that is very true. I know, I'm sure Charles has, and I know I have encountered pages which were claimed to be accessible, and I could use my arrow keys and move up and down and hear them read. But as you already said, the actual uh, performance of a task can be really tortuous to try and get from not A to Z, but A to B. It's
Yeah.
one mouse click, or as you say, 12 tab keys and enter keys and everything else. So there is a difference sometimes between accessibility and efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you also have to consider is all of this implies that the person that we're talking about has good skills with their assistive tech. And
Yeah.
that is not always the case. There are plenty of people in the world who are not technically inclined, and disability doesn't care whether you're technically inclined or not. You still have to learn how to use these tools. And the better you know how to use these tools, the more efficient you can be, especially in a system that isn't designed to be efficiently used by people with disabilities. So the other component from getting to A to B might be that it is perfectly usable and accessible to the person who tested it because they are a tester or they are a developer and they do this all the time. Their skills are up to scratch, but your average user might not be able to. And so getting to A to B for them may not be accessible. And it's not necessarily anything that you did or didn't do to be compliant, but the experience that they're having because they don't know how to use, let's say, the links list command, which is something that most screen readers have, to bypass some of the less usable but still technically accessible parts of your website or your document or your IP, whatever it is. If they don't have that tool in their toolkit, even though that tool is available to them, they're going to struggle even more. So getting from A to B takes 2 or 3 times longer. And so it's really important when you're thinking about the accessibility of something that you're building or testing to not just consider how it works for you or how it works for the three of you that are working on it or what have you. It's really important to think about the end user. And okay, if Joe from off the street goes to a library and needs to pay his bills, and he's newly blind, and all he knows about maybe is narrator, and that's the only way he can do it. How is he going to pay his water bill? You know, what is the experience of somebody who hasn't really gotten much accessibility tech training? And that's the other piece I'd love to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point that I also sometimes I don't realize until after the fact too, of like sometimes it's not just, the experience too, but then how the coding plays with it as well. Because,
Hmm.
one thing that comes up a lot is the how the programmatic side has to match the visual side. Because
Yeah.
this is something I see a lot in my testing where a link looks like a button, but it's not a button. And that's more
Hmm.
than just screen readers too, because like someone with a physical disability who is lacking the use of their hands is using voice control software. They say click this button, doesn't do anything
Right.
because they functionally it's kind of the same, but that semantic meaning is lost, and that's our problem here too. Is you know you your visual side or that tool that you're using to build this thing, it does it automatically for you. It does it fast, great, perfectly. You can just click and drop, and there's your link, and it's good and working. But those tools also are lacking some of the things that we need here in order to make sure that things match up, because a lot of what we're relying on is that marriage between semantic and programmatic behavior.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah. We talk a lot about equitable design in the QA testing world and the development world. And that does not necessarily mean equitable in terms of what it looks like versus what it semantically is. Equitable means that you're providing an equivalent experience to anybody who might be using this page, whether they're visually scrolling through it, non-visually, whether they're using a device that simulates the tab cursor, the tab focus moving through something like a sip and puff or switch controls. And voice control is a fantastic example because voice control, arguably even more than screen readers sometimes, relies on solely that semantic structure to be able to navigate and accomplish tasks.
Yeah, it's fascinating because so much of these things are now built with these tools that do so much automatically for you,
Yeah.
and they don't. We need the tools to do some of this work for us because
Right.
they're not. That's coming up a lot with AI now. Honestly, like we've had to try to give guidance for all these new vibe coders about
Yeah.
like it's not building it in for you. You got to tell it,
Yeah.
but then it
Oh,
over
yeah.
engineers it, and they don't know what to do with it.
I will
Well,
say though, it is totally possible to vibe code accessibly. Claude
Hmm.
Code is really, really good at it, but prompting is a skill just like anything
it
else. But if you
really
prompt it
is.
correctly, it will do it.
And if you're a non-coder, it's really a challenge. I had, pardon me, I had to
Hmm.
uh, demonstrate accessibility. And I was talking about doing a webinar on web browsing near the end of last year, middle of last year. And I wanted some examples of web pages that were not accessible. And I thought, okay, I'll let it build my page content for me. Give me the HTML code. Whammo bammo, there I go. I spent more time trying to
Mm.
describe what I wanted so it would make inaccessible pages for me. It
Hmm.
is, we've, AI is such a handy tool. As a blind person, it's it can be cool because I don't have to necessarily type everything, though I'm a fast typist. Um, I really tap the descriptive powers it kind of brings to the table. But I also learned, man, it might be a servant, but it is by its very nature a dumb servant, and I have to think through what I do and spend some time with trial and error.
Yeah, but it is a skill, and I got a really good tip actually this morning talking about AI. You can have it prompt itself. You can have a
Huh,
conversation back and forth with it and say, okay, now that you know everything I'm trying to do, write yourself a prompt that tells you how to do this, and it will spit out the prompt, and you look it over, make any changes you want, and feed it right back in.
Hmm.
wow.
Yeah, that's good
Yeah.
to know. I do want to, for the purpose of our audience, kind of give them a little bit more background. So, Ron, can you talk a little bit more about like when you go to a website or when, like, because you mentioned to me before, like you really do a lot of training for people, how do you teach them to approach it? Like, what is the starting user experience? Because I think our audience would really benefit from hearing about, what is that for someone who's new when they put in these, either they've tried to make it accessible or what like kind of things that they might overlook when they're working on it.
That is a great question because Charles touched on it already, very, very well. You have so many different people coming with such different levels of experience. And for me, I've browsed the web for it's decades now, believe it or not. It's kind of a weird thing to say, and have learned the screen reader that I use and everything else. But I encounter people whose skills are not the same. This is new. This is a little intimidating. And so you want to try and teach the tools that can be used. One of the interesting things, perhaps interesting, about blind computer users versus sighted computer users, and this is a generalization, and I freely admit that. But as a blind computer user, very often I have to be more aware of the technology than a sighted user does. The GUI interface lets me grab my mouse and click on stuff I want, and actions happen. As a blind user, sometimes I have to know how to go and get that same information. I can make stuff happen, but not always as easily as just seeing an icon and clicking a mouse. So I've got to go into a page. Let's say, Steve, you recommend go to this web page. There's some great info you need to look up, or
Yeah.
go and purchase a ticket. Go, whatever. And so I'm going in with an expectation. I'm going in and I have to sort of ask myself, what am I looking for? And that's kind of obvious because I've been sent there. And so for most users, especially if you're new to this, what is easy? What do you want on this page? What? How is the hard part? How do I find the information? How do I expect it to appear when I go to the page? What am I, what and how? Um, are my two best friends because I need to know what I'm looking for and how it's going to appear. And then I've got to start to explore that page. And that's where it gets into the tools that we've all talked about now, because web pages show up with a bunch of different elements. There's links, there's headings, there are graphics, which I have to figure out how to interact with. There are lists and tables. There's forms. I might have to fill out a form if I'm going to purchase this ticket, whether it's for a concert or a plane flight, right? Coming into this web meeting or the Zoom meeting, I had to fill out an online form, my name, my department I was with, all that kind of stuff. I assume everybody got to jump through those little hoops when they got here. If I am new to web browsing and even just coming into a Zoom meeting, I have to use the tools that hopefully I've got in my mental toolkit. What things can I, do to get around here? How do I interact with these edit fields where it wants my name? So I've got to know what I'm looking for. I'm going to have to know how it's going to appear. And then I'm going to employ these different tools, whether I'm going to, press tab to move element by element, or E to move to edit fields, or H to move from heading to heading, all of those kind of things. And now we get back to AI. Some screen readers even have tools now to make AI describe the page and summarize it. And if the screen reader doesn't have it, I can sometimes refer, an AI to look it up for me. So there are all these tools. I need to employ these tools. I need to explore, and then I need to go back around and keep doing that same process. And if you're into alliteration, I think it's maybe not alliteration, whatever it is, what, how, employ, explore, and then loop back around, make the word wheel. Okay, what are you looking for? How might it appear? What tools will you employ? Go explore the page and then loop back around and do it again. And literally, if I'm going to teach somebody, Steve, how to do it, and they're very new, that is a way to teach this and present this.
I just want to take a second to verbally echo what Stephen just put in chat. Feel free to drop your questions in chat or the Q&A. We're going to get to questions in just a little bit. And while we're talking, if anything strikes your fancy, just drop it into chat.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
The
this is an open forum today.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted this to be more like a fireside chat than an actual presentation because we want you guys to really get a sense of why compliance is just the starting point. I want to ask Ron and Steven the same question, and I'm interested to know what your answers are going to be. Ron, how long do you think it took you, just, ballpark estimate, how long do you think it took you to complete the registration for this event?
That's a great question. Between paddling around and not knowing that some things I was trying to do, the working with the combos didn't take effect because I got no speech indication, and whacking the submit button 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
It
Uh-oh.
probably
Maybe,
took me 10 minutes
maybe
overall,
about
just
10 minutes. Yeah.
messing
Okay.
around on the page.
Steven, how long do you think it would have taken you?
I mean, as the host, it took me 5 seconds because I
Yeah,
just clicked
yeah,
start. But honestly, yeah, it only took me a couple, maybe 2 minutes
Yeah.
because, like, the I'm using a combination of both mouse and keyboard,
sure.
and my whole job is on here, and most of my hobbies are on a computer. So I'm what I would consider myself a power user because I'm using
Sure.
keyboard shortcuts and a mouse at the same time.
Mhm.
Keyboard warrior, man.
Right. But a mouse user is still going to go faster than that because they're still going to be, going straight down rather than having to wait and listen to hear what is that
Yes,
thing.
That's
There's
right.
also something to bring up too of like there's behaviors people don't always realize. And I don't always think to point this out, and this might be something you want to talk to from the Q&A side, Charles, of how um, when you press, like when you get to like a drop down, you don't always realize you can use the arrow keys to filter through the options or something,
right,
Mhm.
or like a menu.
Yeah.
Menus can behave differently depending on how they're coded.
Yeah.
right.
And sometimes it doesn't work the way you think it should. Um, there's something in WCAG, and I should have looked up the specific criterion, but I didn't. So I'm not going to quote it and give you wrong information. But there's something in WCAG that talks about how there should be a submit button to submit combo boxes.
Mm.
Because if you design a drop down, it doesn't have to be a combo box, but any kind of drop down, if you design it so that it automatically changes the content of the page when
Oh,
focus
On
moves
input.
to it. Yes, the on input. Thank you.
Yep.
If you're not supposed to design any part of a web page so that when focus moves to it, it changes
yeah,
elsewhere on the page because
that's ugly.
cause that can cause anything from your screen reader or whatever your AT of choice is to lose focus and go somewhere else on the page, or it will kick it all the way back to the top of the DOM and start reading from the beginning again.
Hmm.
And it also disorients the user because if they're not expecting a change of content, they're not
Right.
going to understand why it's changing. And this is something I see more and more often on more modern websites, these
Mhm.
drop downs that as soon as you move to a new thing, it changes other options. And for somebody, especially somebody who can't take in the entire page at a glance, they may not know that they've just reduced or eliminated certain options that maybe they want later in the flow or earlier in the flow.
I think you need to pause and explain that because I think there's a concept you and I have discussed this, Charles, about how somebody who's sighted acquires information, and we'll use
Oh,
screen for this example, versus how a blind person acquires it because they are literally 180 degrees different.
yeah, we talk a lot about this in terms of the built environment, but it's the same digitally.
Hmm.
Um, when a sighted person walks into a room or first loads a page, that sighted person can quickly look around
Screen
and
at a
get,
glance.
yeah, screen at a glance. They understand, okay, over here is going to be a menu bar. This is going to be the main part of my page. Over here is going to be secondary options, however it's laid out.
Right.
A blind person or a person with, let's say, a motor disability, anybody who can only perceive one element at a time is looking through a teeny tiny straw
Yeah.
and will not understand the entire environment that they're in until they have gone element by element and stepped through everything.
I'd like to
Right.
interrupt here, Charles, because we got a good question in Q&A kind of related
Sure.
to this. Uh, so asking from the perspective of an advertising agency, what is the experience like on a website with banner ads throughout it? Do screen readers detect them?
They
Yeah, they
detect
do.
them
I think in the screen reader world, they're universally despised, I'll be
yes,
honest.
because they break up the flow as I'm trying to read the main content.
And especially ones that refresh, or if you put like a carousel in there
Right.
and you're trying to
Right.
navigate that, that will mess with your focus.
Yeah.
There are great arguments for and against carousels and for and against banner ads, and I don't want to step too much into that. But what I will say is they do read them, and if they are done correctly, it will read all of the content. If they are
Right.
done incorrectly, it will only read the associated URL, which means somebody who's a screen reader user is just stepping through this
Yeah.
giant, 4-line URL, and
They're
that's the
avoiding what you've put there if
Yeah.
they
yeah,
can.
yeah,
There's another part too that I can say from the perspective, because I was just talking with a couple advertising agencies of like, you know, if you're buying like a Google ad space or some other ad service like that, it just says ad space.
Yeah.
So for a
Yeah.
screen
that's
reader
true.
user,
Yeah,
they're just told it's an ad. They don't
It's an
told
ad.
what is it
yeah,
for.
Right.
So, there's a whole missed opportunity there too. Well,
It- It's
I would say a
well,
missed
it's
opportunity.
missed from that perspective anyways. But
it's
Right.
missed
and
from
if
the
you've
ad
got a bunch
agency
of
perspective.
those ganged up near the start of the page, you're wading through basically just blah blah blah. It
Yeah.
doesn't convey any useful information.
Yeah.
But I will say, from the end user perspective, as somebody who's just trying to get to the content,
Yeah.
the Google ad space ad is the best case scenario because all it says is ad, and it doesn't take me that long to move through it.
Right. I think another thing too with the ads especially is it, depending on where they are in the DOM,
Yeah.
like who knows where it's going to show up because
Yeah,
like say it's not, if you're creating a banner ad for your own website about your upcoming event or something, you can control where it shows up. But if you send it to someone else,
Right.
who is it going to be in the middle of the content, at the start of the content, at the end where they might not even get to it?
that's
There's
true.
a lot of missing factors there.
A
Um,
question about lyrical versus
oh
terse
yeah.
uh,
You want to read it out,
copy.
Ron, or should I?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll let.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on when it's best to use short, efficient alt text and when it might be preferable to make it more descriptive, lyrical. How much of this is personal preference of the user?
Oh, yeah. A lot of this is personal preference, I will
Mhm.
say. In my job before I was at the NFB, I was doing QA testing for a fairly well-known accessibility consulting company. And we had internal debates about this probably every month. Like, we never stopped talking about alt text because it's like, it's, yeah, it's very contentious. So I think as a general rule of thumb, your alt text should be fairly brief and only focus on the major point that your image is trying to convey. Some of the times when my colleagues would say that they wanted more detail. I am of the opinion that I want detail all the time, but I think that's a minority opinion, to be honest. Um, but when they want more detail is something like on when you're dealing with fashion, they really wanted to know what things looked like if they were going to be buying them or wearing them. Or travel destinations. They really wanted to have good descriptions of, say, a hotel room if they were trying to figure out, what type of room they were going to book for their vacation.
Yeah.
Some people, this one is a little more contentious, but some people wanted really artsy descriptions of food if you were talking about like a restaurant site, for example. But when in doubt, keep it short. Keep it to a fairly descriptive but short sentence. Probably no more than, oh, I don't know, no more than 50, 100 words max.
So I got to defer to your expertise, Charles. But if I remember correctly, I can have alt text, and then there is. I've done this, but it's been so long since I've done any web stuff, so I'm going to ask you. Um, I believe with your mainline screen readers, you can have alt text, but also other descriptive text can be added, which a user can access. It doesn't even show up on screen, but it can be skipped if you don't want to hear it. And if I really wanted to give you alt text on the graphic and then have
Mm.
more meaty text for people who want it, I think I would build that two-level approach.
For the question that just came in, we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
And I think, Ron, that most of the time the alt text is the hidden text. You don't see alt text unless the image fails to
No,
load.
I
And
understand that, but I
oh, okay.
You
thought there
mean
was
long
another.
description?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, thank
That
you.
it doesn't get used much, which is
I
why I
know,
think
but it's
that's
Charles
why I didn't think
there,
emphasized it
about
but
it.
first.
it's there and it is usable.
It is.
That's
It's
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 true.
it's a resource that does go untapped, which is part of why I couldn't remember what it was called.
I think
Well,
the
that's why
problem with it,
I
like,
didn't even make that connection. But yeah, Steven's right.
yeah, I think the problem with
Long
it is that it
description.
it it exists, but not many tools actually make use of it or make users available or
Yeah,
aware of it rather.
that's it. So
Yeah,
developers don't touch it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Nora, it's long description, right, Steve?
Yeah, so the actual attribute is LONGDESC.
SC. Yeah,
So I'll put that in the chat
There
for
you
you.
go.
yeah. There you go.
But and then it would work kind of like alt text where you would write in the longer
Yeah,
description there, and then they'd have the option to press a button to hear it. But it's only certain tools can do that, and
yeah.
some struggle with it, or so it's
I
not a
know. It's
practice that's really
again, yeah,
encouraged, honestly.
right.
At least
None
Yeah.
of
that's
this
what I've been told.
is, yeah,
Yeah, that's my understanding too. But something else that you can keep in mind is there's no reason, well, I mean, maybe there are reasons, but from an end user perspective, there's no reason why in your surrounding text of your
yeah.
image you can't also include a longer
Some
description of
description.
parts of the image so that your alt text is still fairly short and
Yep.
the screen reader user can move through that. But then because they're going to be reading that surrounding text anyway, you can offer additional details that some visual learners may pick up from the image and some text-based, people who want to read all the text, well, they'll get that too anyway. So a little redundancy,
Yeah.
I don't think is a bad thing.
Well, and you can delimit it as a paragraph, so it's really easy to skip.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I do want to, before we get to the question in chat about mostly accessible and whatnot, there is a relevant question here in Q&A of coming from a design standpoint, when creating a banner ad, we generally create an ad as a JPEG or PNG, which is an image
Yeah.
file.
Yeah.
Unless those ads are built as an HTML5 ad, how are these read if the platform doesn't allow / offer alt text? It's
The
just a
same
dumb
way,
asset? Question mark.
yep, the same way it would be
Yeah.
read if you just uploaded the PNG in the first place. Yeah.
It
It's
says
just read as
graphic.
image.
Yeah. Or image and maybe a number string.
Yeah, and
There are
that's
some browsers, like Chromium browsers, can go to Google and generate an image description, but
Right.
that is incumbent on the user doing that.
Yeah.
right. There's
And,
also like you can try to make the file name descriptive, but ultimately you're still going to hear, .jpeg, .png or whatever at the
Yep.
end. So
Yeah.
mhm.
still a bit of a guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to get to this other question too, because it is a major topic we wanted to touch on today. So, for those of us working on digital accessibility, when a site is mostly accessible, what kinds of issues still make it hard or exhausting to use? I have a follow-up question when you're done with this too.
Ron, do you want to take this from the perspective of somebody who's done training?
You know, I think we've touched on some of it already, fiddly elements and things like that. But the things like carousels, things that refresh,
Yeah.
all by themselves are bad in from the perspective of a screen reader user, unless they're executed carefully. There are ways to do it. But if stuff is refreshing and your screen reader just sees this event change, let's call it, it can do the stuff that Charles describes. It can pop your focus back to the top of the page. Um, and there are some pages which I've gone to some government sites. I was at an FCC site a week or three ago, and I had one of those. This page will refresh in 600 seconds messages.
Hmm.
Well, 600 seconds, that's 10 minutes. Okay, but I had to get my my federal registration number and do this other stuff, and I was just putting it, and refresh came. It was one of those moments, it's
Mm,
it's like it's like knowing that somebody's answering machine only gives you 30 seconds and you're trying to talk really fast to get your whole message in. Um, that one drives me nuts simply because I seem to invariably be at almost the end point. And if I'm a new user, it's even harder because I'm slower and the page will refresh. Anything that refreshes and forces those event changes that screen readers don't quite know what to do with, that is very frustrating because you have no control. You can go and set your screen reader not to refresh, but then if something changes you should know about, you're not going to know. The other thing, let me tell you, one of the, and you see it a lot, is when you guys are doing page development, avoid the click here link. The ones that say to learn more about such and such, and the link is called click here.
Yeah.
or
If
read
I
more.
use my,
Or
read
read
more.
Read
more.
Yes,
more,
that's
learn
the other.
more.
Read more, click here, learn more, all of those. Don't make that the only thing the link title says. Because if one of the tools I have at my disposal as a screen reader user is I can generate a list of links on the page. So I can just see what the links are. Okay. And if all I have is click here, learn more, read more, click here, I have no, and then you forced me to start reading down through the page, maybe even line by line, if you haven't used headings to delineate sections or anything. So don't click here, not as
Oh
a
yeah.
not as a link
This
name.
one this one is burned into my brain because in my previous position, we ensured 2.1 AA compliance, right?
Mhm.
And part of WCAG AA compliance is link name in context, link title,
Yes,
excuse me.
yes,
And that means that you can have your link say click here, learn more, whatever, because somebody reading through that page is going to know why they are clicking there, what they are learning more about.
right.
And 2.4.4 totally allows for that. But we would always push our clients to adopt the AAA version of that, which
Yeah,
said no context, which means you did not need to read your surrounding text, because then you include people who are using tools like links lists to try
yes,
and circumnavigate what would otherwise take them 10 minutes to navigate, going element by element, stepping through the DOM.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this honestly perfectly answers the question I was going to ask of like, what's that little most annoying thing? Like that's not like it's not like a like serious accessibility
It's not a
problem, but it's like
showstopper. Yeah.
right, it's the kind of thing you're not going to raise a complaint about it, but you really, really wish
Hmm.
people would stop doing this thing. But I think you already
Yeah.
answered that, Ron.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, that was Ron's answer, and I think that's a lot of screen reader users' answer. That's not
Right.
my answer. My
Oh, what's
answer is
yours?
headings, and
That,
it's usually not an issue because a lot of people will use at least the first three heading levels. But this comes with two things. One, obviously, if there are no semantic headings on your page, that really annoys me because a lot of AT users will reach for headings first to move through a page and build an understanding of the page they're navigating at the same time. Headings are ideally supposed to be used as a way to kind of outline the content of the page. So if I'm able to step through by headings and the hierarchy of the heading levels is a relatively simple and understandable, there's one H1, there are a couple of H2s, each H2 has like three H3s under it or something like that. That I can understand and I can pick up relatively quickly. And as long as there isn't like sections of content without headings, I'm not going to miss anything major. But if there are no headings, then I have to explore element by element to build an understanding of the page, especially if there are multiple click here's, learn mores, etc. Or if the heading hierarchy is out of order and you're using heading levels from a stylistic point of view,
Uh,
that really messes me up because now I don't understand how the page is structured, generally speaking, and I don't understand which pieces of information are relative to like the page as a whole versus which pieces of information are like in their own section blocks of content. So headings are very, very important, not just from a visual perspective, not just from an organizational perspective, but from a navigation perspective for a lot of people.
I would add on to that too of like, I know sometimes I see like designers or developers like for flyers or whatever want to make the time an event is or its
Hmm.
address a heading as well. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
now you have six headings, but there's only seven readable things on your document.
Yeah.
And now you've defeated the
Ooh, I
purpose
like
of the
that.
heading, you know. Oh, they say
Yeah.
headings are like the GPS of a document. I mean, that's a great way to put it. I mean, so I want to talk to something that our fellow there in the chat has done because they have put together a great analogy that I love to steal shamelessly. If you're looking at a newspaper and for a sighted person you look to the article names like the actual physical thing, like I mean I guess you could go to New York Times or Washington Post, same idea. You look at it and you see that large bold font that tells you what is this chunk about, and this is what you were talking about, Charles. But like if those were just regular text, that would be your experience, and that's what the screen
Right.
reader user's experience is without headings that work.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
a voice control person being able to jump to the next heading, they can't. They have to manually scroll down to view the next thing, so you just have this
Hmm.
wall of text. And I think everyone knows how people feel about walls of text.
Oh yeah. I don't want to say it's worse for a screen reader user, but
Hmm.
you sit down and listen to a synthesized voice just blah 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 blah, blah. I'm just like, okay, I'm done. Sometimes if it's really bad, if it's too much text, I will just leave the page. I'll be like, I'll find another way to do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the absolute thing we want to avoid, especially,
Hmm.
as a government service where, people sometimes have to interact with us. We really
Yeah.
don't want them to try and find other ways around that.
Yeah. I think sectioning off your content, and there's nothing wrong with having, 20 headings across your page as long as you're using them in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
If you really do have, well, I shouldn't say really do have. A lot of government sites have a lot of information on them. There are pages that are, 20 pages of mostly text, and they have to be there, and it's good that they're there. But if you can introduce a little bit of hierarchy, a little bit of semantic structure to that, it makes it way easier to digest and way easier to move around to try and find a specific piece of information.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, continuing on, I guess, from that, so I think both of you can maybe talk to this too, of when we're doing testing on something we're developing or something, we need to think about the headings and the structure. We need to think about the links. But when we're talking about that user experience, what we kind of expect people to do when they get there, how would you suggest people build that step-by-step guide? That's something I get asked for, and I can kind of talk to it, but the way I approach as a tester isn't always matching up to how a person comes to it just looking through it for the first time or through like the 17th time.
Yeah. Well, and before we answer that, I think it's really great that you brought up that, you're going to visit the same page multiple times.
Mm,
And so the way, just like from a normal, quote unquote, normal perspective, right? The way that anybody navigates a page that they visit all the time is going to change because they know where the thing is that they want, or they know exactly what they're doing. And that's no different for an AT user. They start to understand what structures are in place, how the page is laid out. Links list becomes more of a tool because you know exactly what you're scrolling for, and links list in most screen readers gives you the ability to hit the first letter of the label of the link that you're looking for, and so you can just jump right to it. Um, but in terms of your question, I think the way that I most appreciate um, somebody thinking about me navigating through a page is by understanding that there's certain pieces of information that are more likely to be why I'm on that page. Like if I'm paying my water bill and I go to the water utility site, I'm probably not looking for the test to see how clean the water is unless that's specific data I need. I'm probably there to pay my bill. So putting that somewhere near the beginning of the DOM is really helpful for me, especially the first few times that I'm on the site, and making that as accessible as possible, both from a, semantic coding perspective, but also from like just an understanding of this is where I need to go perspective, and just like making that information really easy to find. And I know that web designers talk a lot about what is the most important thing, how many actions is somebody really going to do on my page? How many clicks is it going to take them to get to where they need to go? That becomes even more important to a screen reader user, or really to any AT user, because it goes back to what I talked about earlier in the webinar about it can take an AT user 2 to 3 times longer to do something, even if it's fairly simple. And so, easing that burden as much as you can by being thoughtful about your design is really where I encourage people to start. And then you can build stuff out from that idea.
do want to just quickly clarify for everyone. DOM refers to document object model. So it's essentially the way the code is written, like kind of how your Word document is. And it's the same way. So like AT, which typically ignores your styling, is going to follow that. So if you put that paragraph after the image, but the image is like related to it, they're going to hear the image first.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that Charles is referring to.
Also, we hear all of your CSS and all of your pseudo elements, and that's a whole separate rant.
We'll save that for the next one.
That's
Yeah,
true.
that can be a whole other thing.
There we go. Ron, do you have anything to add here?
No, that was good. No,
Okay.
completely.
I would like to add personally, from my side too, of as a tester, sometimes with this kind of thing is, people we're dealing with sometimes like content managers and such who are not knowledgeable about the code, and so they're worried about what can they do, or what they're having, how do they think about this kind of thing. And in those cases, it's again like Charles was saying, of just like, how can we reduce that cognitive load? Like, kind of goes back to the headings and the understanding, because visually it breaks it up. And there's that marriage again of programmatic to semantic, because without the programmatic side, it doesn't work for someone using AT. But conversely, if you put too much in the programmatic side, we sometimes see this with the vibe coding, is that it over engineers it. And now
Yeah,
you've got this thing that can break real easy, and or it doesn't make sense to a user maybe with a cognitive disability,
yeah.
or has no
Oh,
disability at all.
I want to add one more thing
Yeah.
too. Redundancy is you can
Mm.
definitely overly redundicize. That's not a word, but you can
We
you
got
can
the
add too
idea.
much redundancy.
Yeah.
But a little bit of redundancy, I think, is always a good idea. If you know that a page is going to be popular, put a link to it in four different places on your homepage. You can scatter those around. You can put it in the main menu and in the footer and a couple places in your main stuff. And then, because it's in your menu bar and it's in your footer, that's always going to be accessible. But then also you can scatter it on a few other pages that are probably going to be fairly popular. And that enables people who may be dealing with a little bit of cognitive overload to more easily find the most popular resources. And it also enables somebody like a screen reader user to find it on their first couple of passes so that they know that they can move to the closest one if it's a page that they visit a lot. Using a screen reader and using keyboard only navigation is a lot like driving a car. And when you're driving around a city, there are multiple ways to get to a destination, but you always have to follow the current road that you're on. And there are certain rules that you have to obey, and you can't just like decide to swerve out of your lane. Driving a computer from a keyboard is kind of the same way, where there are certain paths that you are restricted to following. You can't just drag your mouse to a completely different block of content and go click. You have to move through the DOM, or you have to move through the page as it's set up. So offering multiple paths to get to the most popular destinations in your site or in your document is, I think, is the ideal way to think about it.
I have a new analogy to steal.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
someone
The
else
the
in the
driving
chat
analogy is
agrees.
really popular.
Yeah.
I just hadn't brought it up yet.
Well, thank you. I'm going to use that shamelessly.
Yeah. You're such a thief. Jeez.
I am. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. So, Ron, final thoughts.
Oh my goodness. I guess when you're doing this, I don't want to say don't overthink it, because if it does need to be thought about as you're talking about and thinking about accessibility. Our perspective is blindness, of course, and there's so many other things that other people bring to the table, and Charles touched on cognition and motor skills and some other things. But so don't overthink it, but be careful when you're and this is for if you're thinking of advertising, if you're thinking of page development, when you are trying to frame what you're doing, whether you're making a web page, you're writing copy, you're writing script stuff, you're the document people, so you're doing uh, documentation for something, a program or whatever. Uh, when you're thinking about who your audience is, you don't want to leave them hanging, but don't underestimate them either. The other big thing that annoys me, and it's more in interaction and in documentation, if it is assumed that I'm not able, not that I don't know something, but that I'm not able. So things are over described, oversimplified. That is the other pitfall I think that one can fall into,
Mm,
you know. And I don't quite know how to illustrate that well for you. I just know when I hit it, I'm like, oh, come on. You
right,
don't have to tell me that.
right.
So, tell me to eat. Don't tell me how to use a fork today.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, a good example is some websites will tell you press tab to navigate to such and such. Like,
Ah,
cool, but like I don't need you to tell me how to
That's the
operate my
default
tech.
behavior, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. That's what's going to happen anyway.
yeah.
So,
Um, I
Charles, your
think
final thoughts.
I think mine would be it seems a little counter to Ron's on the surface, but it really isn't. Um, Simple is best.
Yeah.
Do not overcomplicate things unless for some reason you have to. And if somebody is forcing you to overcomplicate things, it might be worth saying, okay, but if we overcomplicate this too much, people are going to leave because they get confused or they're going to get frustrated.
I think that's
Um,
right on. Yeah, that's
yeah,
not the same as assuming somebody doesn't know. It's saying don't drown them in verbiage.
Yeah, well, not just verbiage, but you can overly semanticize a page. You can create
Hmm.
a structure that's so convoluted that it makes sense to you because you're the one that designed it. But
Right.
somebody coming fresh into it, they're going to be like, why am I encountering 40 heading level twos in the nav
Yes.
bar before I ever find a heading level one?
Yes.
Um, Simple is best. Simple icons that are universal as you can get. simple language so that you're not overly complicating your verbiage, simple headings, simple link descriptions. There's nothing wrong with being artistic and adding your flair and having a little style. But if you overcomplicate it, then you start to lock out people who have limited cognitive space, limited cognitive load. You start to lock out people who may not have a computer that can render things if it's overly graphically heavy. I worked on a lot of sites in my previous position, mostly car and boat and RV dealerships, but a few other ones too, that went so hard into the graphics and the CSS and the crazy multi-prioritized layers of every page that some lower end machines wouldn't even be able to load them.
Mhm.
So just keep things simple, keep them intuitive, and double check yourself. It might be simple to you, but it might not be simple to somebody else. So, if at all possible, manual test it and manual test it with people who are different to you, that use different technology to you, who, I don't know, maybe you even disagree with if you happen to know the person, but just get perspectives that are not your own.
I would follow that up with what I tend to tell people I work with of when you're building this or you're writing this, if it's just a simple document even,
Mhm.
if it annoys you, it's going to annoy your audience.
Yeah.
That's true.
So that's usually my benchmark for when I'm testing something of, is this something that we're going to suggest you fix or we're going to require you to fix?
Mhm.
Because if it's that annoying when I'm dealing with it as a tester, I'm going to have more patience than, because it's my job, than the person who's coming to your website for the first time and trying to do something.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, we have 2 minutes left, and I'm going to shamelessly steal it for a plug. Ron and I work at the National Federation of the Blind for the Center of Excellence in Nonvisual Accessibility. I advocate for education and employment. He advocates for home and independent living. But we have plenty of contacts across the organization. We're headquartered here in Baltimore. You can email us at chiser@nfb.org. That's CHISER, or rmiller, RMILLER, at nfb.org. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. And of course, thank you to the National Federation of the Blind for being a great partnership over these years. We've been working with them for 6 years now because
Yeah.
we pretty much started right around 2020. Ron and Charles are new to the team, but they've been wonderful so far, and we are looking forward to continuing that partnership.
Mhm.
So, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope this gave you a bit more perspective on the impact of our work, and then also again on when you're approaching these things, how you should think about the end user and their experience. So. Thank you, everyone, and please have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Mhm. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.